Hey folks, welcome to Spark Q&A. I'm Matt Arnold, and this is where I answer your questions about complexity and innovation. And wanted to tackle a great question from Adam Hansen. Adam is a friend, a bit of a co-conspirator, and he was responding to a post that I had on LinkedIn about why innovation fails in real organizations. And I was making references to Groundhog's Day and being caught in a time loop. So, uh, yeah, that is the context for that. A little bit about Adam. He is the co-author of a fantastic book called Outsmart Your Instincts, where it takes basically a behavioral approach to innovation and talks about the biases that get in the cognitive biases that get in the way of innovation. So he co-authored Outsmart Your Instincts. He's a VP of Behavioral Innovation at Ideas to Go, and he's been a guest on the Iowa Idea podcast. And then Adam and I were uh, guests on the same episode of Behavioral Grooves, and I'll have links to all of those in the description. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to address the question, but I've also fed some materials about this into NotebookLM and generated the audio. So that will come at the end of this. So it might be boring from a visual perspective, but the good news is you don't have to look at me. But I think it's a really interesting conversation as we address some of these components. So uh, the fighting the Groundhog Day effect. And Adam's question was, where are we asking for novelty while rewarding conformity? And what might happen if we temporarily relaxed a constraint for, say, 60 days and see if the loop loosens? So I think that framing is exactly right. Because most organizations, we're not short on ideas. We're operating inside systems that are designed for predictability, efficiency, risk reduction, and those create gravity, right? And that gravitational pull, uh, you know, kind of two scientific kind of analogies. The gravitational pull brings it back down to Earth, and it really just then crushes the idea. Another one is that the antibody effect, right? Is that we send out antibodies to reject what is new. And so we get the behavior we incent, and when the incentives are on predictability, efficiency, and risk reduction, we're not going to get great innovation to succeed. So uh, the challenge isn't generating the ideas. It really is the conditions in which those ideas might grow, how we might cultivate them, test them. And so that's the idea of relaxing the constraints and why that matters. Now, I don't think most organizations can realistically step outside of their norms for 60 days. It would be great if we could find experimental reasons where they could. But I think if we took small breaks and we suspended a lot of these constraints in a controlled environment, that could be successful. So I really think that's what could be done to deliberately break the loop, something small, focused, intentional. And this is where I would see real value in something like a hackathon, an ideathon, a pitch competition, some type of specific event where a lot of these constraints are removed and for a short period of time. And so that way people can test, explore, build, and they can move kind of outside that orbit of the gravitational pull. But these aren't a replacement for the core system, right? And they're not a guarantee of breakthrough outcomes. What they do is expose that gap, and then hopefully, building through learning and prototyping, we can see what the gap is, and then the gap between what we say we want, innovation, novelty, new value, and what the system actually supports. So if we're going to extend Adam's question, it wouldn't just be what the constraint, what constraint could we relax for 60 days? It would be what constraint could we relax for a short focus period tied to a real insight to see what changes. And then, just as important, what did we learn about our system from that experiment? Because the goal isn't just to generate ideas, it's to better understand the conditions required for those ideas to survive. And once we see that more clearly, you can start to make a more deliberate choice about what needs to change, even within the system you already have. So, Adam, thanks again. I think it would be a worthwhile experiment to test these so that we can focus on the novelty and new information versus just the predictability component of the system. If you have a question, hit me up in the comments here or on LinkedIn, and would love to follow up. And now for the latter half of our experiment, see how it goes. We're going to have the audio from Notebook LM, and from there It'll sound like a podcast of folks talking about these ideas. I think the quality of that was great, and in the spirit of experimentation, I'm going to let that run. I'll just put some visual cards up to have a visual there. But at this point, you might just want to set the video in the background and listen in. Thanks again so much for checking in on Spark Q&A, and Adam, thanks as always for just being a great friend, co-conspirator, idea partner. Hope everyone's doing well. Catch you soon.
What if the exact systems your company built to, guarantee its survival are the very things guaranteeing its eventual death?
That is quite the question to start with.
Right. But you have probably seen this play out. I mean, usually when a company announces they desperately need fresh ideas, you immediately picture this massive burst of creative energy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You imagine these whiteboards completely covered in colorful sticky notes, people rolling up their sleeves, everyone feeling totally unleashed to just change the world.
Yeah, it's like the classic cinematic brainstorming montage.
Yeah.
It feels incredibly optimistic, kind of like the beginning of a startup within a legacy company.
Exactly. It feels like the beginning of an adventure. But then you fast forward, say, 6 months, and the whiteboard is completely erased.
Yeah.
The sticky notes have fallen off the wall and ended up in the trash. And everyone in the office is just doing the exact same thing they were doing before the big announcement.
It is the absolute definition of a corporate mirage.
Yeah.
You thought you saw an oasis of change, but it was really just business as usual shimmering in the distance.
Man, that's a good way to put it.
And, the hangover from that kind of false start is just brutal for morale.
It really is. It leaves everyone feeling incredibly frustrated. And if you're listening to this right now, whether you are a manager trying to steer a team, a creative pitching your heart out, or, just someone who is intensely curious about how groups of human beings function, you have absolutely felt this.
Oh, without a doubt.
You felt the crushing weight of an organization that loudly says it wants new ideas, but then quietly, almost invisibly, just destroys them. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our mission today is to uncover the hidden reasons why great ideas actually die at work and, more importantly, how you can rescue them.
And we are going to move completely past the standard blame game today. Because when ideas fail, our very first instinct is usually to point fingers at the people in the room.
Oh, right. It's their fault.
Exactly. We blame a lack of budget, or we say leadership is uninspired, or we conclude that our team members just, aren't creative enough. But today, we are looking right past the people to examine the invisible systems at play.
Yeah, and to figure this out, we're drawing from some truly brilliant insights. I was recently reading a February 2026 piece by Matt Arnold called Why Innovation Breaks Down in Real Organizations.
That's a great article.
It really is. And as I was reading it, I realized it perfectly pairs with some behavioral science we've been looking at from Adam Hansen.
Oh, yeah.
He's the VP of Behavioral Innovation at Ideas to Go, and he did this fantastic Spark Q&A recently. If we put these two perspectives together, it gives us kind of X-ray vision into the corporate machine.
It really does. Because both of these thinkers force us to, stop hyper-focusing on the individual employees and start relentlessly analyzing the environment those employees are operating inside.
Yes, the environment dictates the outcome. So, to kick this off, Matt Arnold uses a pop culture reference that I think perfectly captures the vibe of a stalled company. He compares organizational innovation to the 1993 movie Groundhog Day.
It is a painfully accurate analogy for corporate life, honestly.
Right. If you've seen it, Bill Murray's character is caught in this bizarre time loop. Every single morning, the alarm clock goes off at 6 a.m. playing I Gotcha Babe, and he just relives the exact same day over and over, no matter what he tries to do differently.
Yeah, he's just stuck.
Arnold argues that organizations get stuck in their own repeating loops. You have the exact same aspirational strategy conversations in Q1, the same exciting initiatives launched in Q2, and the exact same failed outcomes by Q4. Wash, rinse, repeat.
And this is where we really have to make a major shift in our perspective. Because from the inside, living through that repeating loop feels like a massive failure of execution.
It feels terrible.
It does. It feels like nobody's trying hard enough, or like you just haven't stumbled upon that one magical golden idea yet.
Yeah, it feels personal. You sit at your desk thinking, if I was just smarter, or if I work 60 hours a week instead of 40, I could break this loop.
Exactly. But from a systems perspective, this repeating loop is not a failure at all.
Wait, really?
Yeah. It is entirely predictable. You have to realize that organizations are simply operating inside systems that were explicitly designed for predictability, for efficiency, and for risk reduction. The system is doing exactly what it was built to do.
Yeah.
Produce the same reliable result over and over and over again.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where I usually hit a mental roadblock, and I'm sure someone listening is thinking the exact same thing.
Sure.
If a company goes out and hires brilliant, highly educated, fiercely creative people, and the CEO stands up at a town hall and explicitly tells those brilliant people to innovate, why isn't human ingenuity enough to break that loop?
It's a great question.
I mean, shouldn't a room full of really smart people be able to just outthink a rigid system?
It's a completely fair question. And honestly, it is the trap that almost all leaders fall into. To answer it, we have to look at a quote from the pioneering psychologist Kurt Lewin, which Matt Arnold actually features to anchor his argument.
Okay.
Lewin famously said, "There is nothing so practical as a good theory."
Which, I mean, that sounds like an oxymoron at first. Usually we think of theory as the exact opposite of practical. You know, like, oh, that works in theory, but not in practice.
Right, but what Lewin meant is that a good theory actually explains the underlying mechanics of human behavior, allowing you to predict what will happen next.
Ah, I see.
If your theory doesn't hold up in the messy real world, it's just a bad theory. And the operating theory here is that organizations behave like complex, self-correcting systems. They're absolutely not just collections of smart individuals.
So the math of the system basically overrules the IQ of the people inside it.
Precisely. The system's behavior will almost always override individual ingenuity because the system is mathematically weighted toward its own survival and stability. Yeah, when you introduce a chaotic new variable, like a radically innovative, untested idea, the system will automatically self-correct to neutralize that chaos.
Yeah.
It honestly doesn't matter how smart the person holding the idea is.
Okay, so if the system itself is the problem, if it's naturally self-correcting to neutralize anything new, we need to understand exactly how it does that.
Definitely.
What are the specific weapons the system uses against our shiny new ideas? Because it's not like, you know, a robot comes out and shreds your documents in the break room.
No robots.
Arnold's piece outlines two major forces at play here. The first one he calls organizational gravity.
Organizational gravity. It's a great term because it perfectly describes a force that is everywhere, affecting everything, but completely invisible.
Right. It represents the relentless pull of business as usual. We are talking about the existing incentive structures, the quarterly performance expectations, the established HR approval processes, the cultural norms of how meetings are run.
All that.
But before we vilify it, I want to push back on the premise for a second. Gravity keeps us grounded. In a business, isn't business as usual what actually pays the bills? Why are we framing stability as the villain here?
That is the crucial nuance. Organizational gravity is not a villain. It isn't malicious, and it certainly doesn't hate your new idea.
It's just a force.
Exactly. It has no feelings at all. It's simply the necessary mechanism by which a business stabilizes itself so it can actually deliver its current products, keep the lights on, and, pay its employees today. You need gravity so things don't just float away into total chaos.
But the side effect is devastating for anything new. I love the analogy Arnold uses here. He says, launching an innovation inside a company is not like a fun whiteboard session. It is literally like launching a satellite into space.
Think about the sheer physics of that. It requires immense, disproportionate, violent energy just to leave the launch pad.
Exactly. If you don't generate enough lift, enough sustained thrust, that satellite never escapes orbit. The gravitational pull of your company's normal day-to-day operations just drags it right back down to Earth.
Yep.
It burns up on re-entry, and from the outside, it just looks like another failed project. Everyone says, oh, I guess it was a bad idea, but the idea might have been structurally sound. It might have been brilliant.
Gravity simply doesn't care about your good intentions.
Right, it just cares about mass and weight.
What's fascinating here is that gravity is only the passive force. It just pulls. Arnold then introduces a second force that is much more active and much more aggressive. He calls them organizational antibodies.
Oof, just the word antibodies makes it
Right.
sound like biological warfare happening in the office.
Well, it is a biological response. Think about how a human body responds when a foreign object enters it. The immune system immediately floods the area with white blood cells and antibodies to attack, isolate, and destroy the intruder. The goal is to protect the host at all costs.
Yeah.
Arnold uses this phenomenal metaphor of an organ transplant to explain how this works in a company.
This part really blew my mind because it perfectly explains the hypocrisy we feel at work.
It's powerful. Let's say a patient is incredibly sick and critically needs a new heart to survive. The doctors know it, the patient's brain knows it, everyone is rationally on board with this surgery.
Makes sense.
But when that new life-saving heart is actually placed into the chest cavity, the body's immune system doesn't see a miracle cure. It sees an alien threat.
Wow.
It sees something that does not share its exact historical DNA,
Right.
and it violently attacks it. Organizations do the exact same thing to new ideas.
I want to ground this for the listener because we use terms like antibodies, but what does an organizational antibody attack actually feel like on a Tuesday afternoon?
Good question.
It's that dreaded moment in a pitch meeting where a finance director asks you for a bulletproof 5-year ROI projection on an idea you literally thought of in the shower yesterday.
Yeah.
That is an antibody attack.
Yes, absolutely. It looks like an endless series of completely rational-sounding hurdles. Budgets are suddenly questioned with extreme, unprecedented scrutiny.
Oh, yeah.
Timelines get artificially extended for, more review by committee. And worst of all, like you just said, performance metrics that were designed for mature, decades-old product lines are suddenly weaponized against a fragile 2-week-old experiment.
Imagine how deeply frustrating that is for you, the listener, trying to push something new forward. Rationally, the executive leadership team is standing on stage at the annual retreat saying they desperately want innovation.
Right.
They know the company needs a new heart to survive the next decade of market shifts. But systemically, the company unleashes its middle management antibodies to attack and reject the very thing it needs to live. It feels like total madness.
It feels like madness to the person holding the idea. But again, returning to Lewin's theory, it is entirely predictable system behavior.
Because it's doing its job.
Exactly. The core of the business is heavily optimized to protect what already exists. The finance director asking for the 5-year projection isn't evil. They are a white blood cell flawlessly executing their programming to protect the company's cash flow.
Which brings us to this massive structural clash between what we say we want and what our systems are actually programmed to do. This paradox is the perfect bridge into the insights from Adam Hansen's Q&A.
Oh, Adam Hansen's work is fantastic here.
Yeah, he is looking at this exact same dynamic from a behavioral standpoint, and he distills this entire chaotic mess down into one piercing question. He asks, where are we asking for novelty while rewarding conformity?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that single question is the absolute epicenter of the problem. That gap, the distance between begging for novelty but paying for conformity, is the exact breeding ground where organizational gravity and antibodies are born.
Let's make this really concrete. We tell a mid-level manager to think outside the box and disrupt the industry.
Right.
But then we tie 100% of their year-end bonus, their mortgage payments, and their kids' college funds to hitting very specific, very safe, incremental KPIs that exist strictly inside the box.
Precisely. The quiet, invisible incentives of almost every major organization push people toward safe, predictable work.
Yeah.
We promote and reward the person who flawlessly executes the known historical process without any hiccups. We do not reward the person who stumbles 3 times and misses a quarterly target because they were trying to invent a completely new process.
That's so true.
The system physically cannot support breakthrough novelty if the financial and social rewards are exclusively tied to conformity.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, and this is a massive takeaway for you listening. Whether you are the CEO or a junior designer, ideas alone are not enough.
Not even close.
Yeah. We spend so much time and money obsessed with generating the perfect idea. We host offsite workshops. We bring in expensive consultants to lead brainstorming sessions.
Yep, the whole circus.
But without supportive structures, without changing the underlying incentives and expectations, even the most earth-shattering genius idea will simply get absorbed by gravity or destroyed by the antibodies before it ever reaches the customer.
Ideas are foundational, yes, you obviously need them. But building a resilient system where those ideas can actually survive contact with reality, that is the actual work of innovation.
Okay, so that leads us to the million-dollar question.
Dead man.
If the core system is fundamentally rigged to protect itself, and it is biologically programmed to attack anything new, how do we actually get innovation to survive? Because realistically, you can't just pause a Fortune 500 company for a year to rewrite all its cultural DNA, redesign its compensation packages, and fire all the antibodies.
You can't.
The business still has to run. The current products still have to ship.
You're right. You cannot pause the core business. And that's where Adam Hansen offers a very practical, almost subversive strategy. He asks us a fascinating what-if question.
Okay.
What if we temporarily relaxed a single constraint for just 60 days to see if the Groundhog Day loop loosens?
Just a temporary, highly targeted break in the rules.
Exactly. It's about creating small, deliberate, focused breaks tied to a real insight. You don't try to overthrow the entire corporate system. You just carve out a temporary bubble where the system's normal rules do not apply.
Let's walk through what that actually looks like. Imagine you are a listener running a marketing team. What if you went to your team and said, for the next 60 days, any experimental campaign that costs under $5,000 does not need to go through the standard 3-level legal and finance approval process.
Okay.
You just removed the antibody of bureaucratic scrutiny. You relaxed one constraint. How differently does that team behave when they know they won't be punished for moving fast?
They behave completely differently. And this dynamic perfectly explains why things like corporate hackathons or focused innovation sprints actually work when they are done right.
Right.
And to be clear, they do not work because everyone gets free pizza and wears casual T-shirts instead of suits.
Oh, for sure. The ping pong tables and the casual attire are just window dressing. It's corporate theater.
Exactly. They work because of what they temporarily remove.
Yeah.
For 48 hours or 60 days or whatever the designated time frame is, leadership explicitly removes the normal approval processes.
Yep.
They remove the standard ROI metrics. They completely remove the pressure to be 100% right before you even start building a prototype.
You are effectively allowing a small team to move into a temporary orbit completely outside the organization's normal gravity.
That's a great way to put it.
Inside that bubble, they are operating under a different set of physics. They can test, they can build, and crucially, they can fail without any career repercussions.
It's a protected sandbox. And to build on how to construct these sandboxes, we can look at a concept from Patty O'Reilly, who discussed this on the Iowa IDEA podcast. He talks about something called effectual innovation.
Effectual innovation.
Right.
Okay, how does that fit into hacking the system?
It's a brilliant layer to add because effectual innovation explicitly says, do not try to assault the core of the company directly. Don't walk into the main boardroom and demand sweeping changes to the flagship product.
That's a terrible idea.
It is a suicide mission. The antibodies will win every single time. Instead, effectual innovation creates what O'Reilly calls wild spaces at the very edges of the organization.
Wild spaces, I really love that terminology. Let me try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping the mechanics of this.
Go for it.
It's like trying to grow a really delicate, rare orchid. If you plant that orchid right in the middle of a busy 8-lane highway, which represents the core business, it gets instantly crushed by the semi-trucks of daily operations. A wild space is like building a tiny reinforced greenhouse on the far edge of the property. The climate inside is controlled, the soil is different, and the trucks physically cannot run it over.
That is a perfect analogy. The wild space is the greenhouse. These spaces are designed for maximum diversity of thought and experimentation, but because they are small, temporary, and exist on the margins, they carry significantly lower financial and operational risk.
Which means they trigger far less resistance from the core system. The finance antibodies don't care about a tiny greenhouse on the edge of town.
Precisely. By bootstrapping ideas using resources that are already available and keeping the stakes relatively low, the innovation can start to prove its value quietly.
That makes total sense.
Once the orchid is strong and blooming, it's much easier to integrate it back into the main property. It spreads organically inward rather than trying to force it from the top down.
So what does this all mean for the person listening right now? Let's say you take this advice tomorrow. You find a wild space at the edge of your department, you relax a major constraint for 60 days, you build your little greenhouse, and you run an experiment. What is the actual end goal here?
It's a crucial question.
Is the point just to finally get that one good software feature or product idea out the door?
This raises an important point, and it's honestly where a lot of well-meaning leaders misinterpret the entire strategy. The ultimate goal of relaxing those constraints and building wild spaces is not just to generate a list of shiny new product ideas.
It's not. Then what are we doing all this for?
The primary goal is to vividly expose the hidden gaps in your own system. By watching what your team suddenly becomes capable of when the normal rules are lifted, you gain critical, undeniable intelligence.
Oh, I see.
You suddenly understand the exact specific conditions those ideas actually need to survive.
So the experiment isn't just about the product. It's a diagnostic test on the company itself.
Exactly. You learn about your own internal environment. You see exactly which middle management approval process was acting as a bottleneck. You identify exactly which legacy performance metric was acting as an antibody.
That is so smart.
And once you have that real-world data, you aren't just guessing anymore. You can start making highly deliberate, surgical choices about what needs to permanently change in the core system to let future ideas survive without needing a temporary greenhouse.
So you're treating the system itself as the prototype you are iterating on, not just the widget you're trying to sell. You are redesigning the launch pads so the next satellite actually has the thrust to break orbit on its own.
Precisely. You fix the system and the system fixes the ideas.
That is such a powerful, empowering shift in perspective. Okay, let's wrap this up and pull all these threads together. If you are listening to this and you feel totally stuck in that Groundhog Day loop of endless circular meetings and dead-end initiatives, here are your core nuggets to take away. First, stop blaming your team for a lack of ideas. You probably don't have an idea problem. You have a system problem. Second, you have to recognize the very real, very impersonal forces of organizational gravity and corporate antibodies. Remember, the organ transplant, they aren't evil. They're just the business trying to protect itself from chaos.
Absolutely.
And finally, stop trying to fight that massive system head-on. Look for ways to deliberately break the loop. Find your wild spaces at the edges, build your greenhouse, and see what happens when you temporarily relax the constraints.
And I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, lay it on us.
We talked extensively about how organizational antibodies attack new ideas, the exact same way a biological immune system attacks a foreign object to protect the host.
Okay.
It is fundamentally a survival mechanism. But consider this. What happens when the external environment around that organism has changed so drastically that the existing body is simply no longer suited for survival? Could it be that by perfectly executing their biological imperative to reject the unfamiliar, these organizational antibodies are actually speeding up the company's ultimate demise by violently rejecting its only chance to mutate and adapt?
Wow. If the climate changes, the organism absolutely has to mutate to survive, but its own immune system fights the mutation to the death.
Exactly.
That is a chilling thought for any legacy company out there thinking they were playing it safe. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As you head back into your work this week, keep your eyes open, spot the gravity pulling at your team, watch out for the antibodies in your next pitch meeting, and most importantly, find a way to carve out those wild spaces. Because who knows, you might just be the one to finally make those sticky notes on the whiteboard mean something again. Catch you next time.